If Sansa had accepted Tyrion as her husband in Game of Thrones, the entire trajectory of both their lives, and possibly the fate of Westeros, would have changed. The feast had long ended, but the weight of the day still pressed heavily on Sansa's shoulders. She sat by the window in their chamber, staring out at the blackened sky, the lights of King's Landing flickering in the distance. Somewhere in this wretched city, her enemies plotted, schemed, and laughed at her fate. Married to a Lannister, she had imagined her wedding day so differently. Once, she had dreamed of being betrothed to a gallant knight, of standing beside a man as noble as her father. Instead, she had been given to a man the world mocked, a man from the family that had destroyed hers, Tyrion Lannister. She had expected cruelty, had braced for humiliation, but none had come. He had been gentle, almost reluctant. Even now he sat in the opposite corner of the room, sipping wine, watching her with something that looked like patience, perhaps even understanding. "You don't have to fear me, Lady Sansa," Tyrion said, setting his goblet down. "I made a vow, and I intend to keep it. I will never touch you unless you wish it." Sansa's fingers tightened in her lap. She had been afraid he would say that, not because she feared him, but because she knew it meant he was different. The Lannisters had taken everything from her, and yet here was Tyrion, the only one among them who showed her kindness. It would have been easier if he were cruel, then she could hate him. She turned to him slowly. "What do you gain from that, my lord?" He chuckled, though there was little humor in it. "Perhaps I have no wish to be like my father." Sansa hesitated, considering him. He was not handsome, nor tall, nor the man she had once dreamed of. But he was clever, and he was offering her something no other man had: choice. Perhaps that was the moment it happened, the moment she decided. She would never have the life she wanted, but she could take what was offered. So she nodded. "Then, let us be allies, if nothing else." Tyrion's expression flickered with something unreadable, and then he smiled. The days after the wedding passed in uneasy peace. Sansa had expected the usual cruelty from Joffrey, his smirking glances, his barbed words, but to her surprise the boy king had grown bored of tormenting her. Perhaps he thought she had suffered enough, being wedded to a Lannister dwarf, or perhaps he saw no sport in it anymore, not when Sansa no longer recoiled in shame. She was still a prisoner in all but name, but she had something now, something small yet powerful. A choice. Tyrion had been true to his word. He made no demands of her, nor did he force intimacy. Instead, he treated her with an odd sort of courtesy. He spoke to her as an equal, something no one else in King's Landing had done since her father's death. It was strange, and stranger still was the way she found herself beginning to listen. One evening, he brought her to the solar they now shared, and poured 2 cups of wine, pushing one toward her. She hesitated before taking it, though she barely sipped. "I won't be here long," she said, watching him carefully. "The North will come for me." Tyrion sighed, leaning back in his chair. "I hope for your sake that's true, but the North is far and the Lannisters are still in power. You should prepare for the possibility that you may be here longer than you wish." Sansa wanted to argue, to insist that her brother Robb would never leave her in the clutches of their enemies. But something about the way Tyrion looked at her made her pause. It was not mockery or condescension, it was sadness. "You think I'll never leave, don't you?" she asked. "I think it would be wise to plan for every outcome," Tyrion answered carefully. "I do not want you to be a prisoner, Sansa. But survival in King's Landing requires more than just hope. It requires strategy. Strategy. That was what she had always lacked. She had spent too long believing in stories, in knights and honor. That was what had led her here, to this place, to this fate. She studied Tyrion for a long moment. If she accepted him as her husband, if she truly did, then perhaps she could gain something from it. Safety, protection, power. She set her untouched wine aside and met his gaze. "Teach me," she said softly. Tyrion raised an eyebrow. Teach. You? You are the cleverest man in Westeros, she said, though the words felt strange on her tongue. If I am to survive here, I need to learn. Teach me how to play the game. For the first time since their wedding, she saw true surprise flicker across Tyrion's face. But then, slowly, he smiled. As you wish, Lady Sansa. The lessons began in quiet moments, away from the prying eyes of the court. Tyrion never called them lessons outright, but Sansa knew what they were. He wove them into casual conversations, testing her knowledge of alliances, pushing her to think beyond what was obvious. Who is the most dangerous person in King's Landing? He asked one evening as they dined in their chamber. Sansa knew the answer that was expected. Joffrey, she said without hesitation. Tyrion gave a slow shake of his head. No, Sansa frowned. But he is cruel. Yes, but cruelty is predictable. Joffrey is dangerous, but he is also a fool. He plays at power, but does not truly understand it. The most dangerous person is the one who wields power unseen. Sansa thought for a moment. The Queen. Tyrion smiled, taking a sip of wine. Better, but still wrong. Sansa's fingers tightened around her cup. Then who? Lord Varys. And Littlefinger. Sansa stiffened at the mention of Peter Baelish. She had not seen him since the wedding, but she knew he still lurked in the shadows of the court. He had been her friend once, or so she had thought. You distrust them? She asked. I distrust anyone who plays the game better than I do. Tyrion leaned forward. Varys serves the realm, or so he claims, but his loyalty is a shifting thing. He knows too much, and knowledge is a weapon more deadly than any blade. As for Littlefinger, his mouth curled into something bitter. Littlefinger wants everything, and men like that are the most dangerous of all. Sansa swallowed, thinking back to the way Peter had looked at her, the way he had whispered of taking her home. He had always made her uneasy, but she had never quite known why. Now she thought she understood. You are learning, Tyrion murmured. Sansa met his gaze. Not fast enough, he chuckled. Give it time. You are young, but you are not weak. There is a fire in you, Lady Sansa. Do not let them snuff it out. She had spent so long feeling powerless, like a bird trapped in a cage, waiting to be freed. But perhaps she did not need to wait. Perhaps she could find a way to free herself, and if Tyrion was willing to help her, to guide her, then perhaps accepting him as her husband had not been a curse after all. Perhaps it had been an opportunity. The court had begun to take notice. It was subtle at first, whispers in the halls, lingering glances at feasts. Sansa could feel the shift, the way the nobles regarded her differently. Before, she had been the tragic, stark girl, a hostage, a victim of her circumstances. Now, she was something else. Tyrion's wife, and more importantly, Tyrion's student. She had begun to speak more at meals, asking questions, observing carefully. She did not shrink when the Queen's gaze landed on her, nor did she flinch when Joffrey sneered. She kept her head high, her words measured. It was a delicate game, but one she was beginning to understand. Cersei noticed. You seem different. Little dove, the Queen murmured one afternoon as they walked the gardens. The words were meant to sound casual, but Sansa knew better. She had learned that Cersei's words were never careless. I am married now, Your Grace, Sansa said, keeping her tone sweet, her face unreadable. A wife must learn to carry herself with grace. Cersei studied her, golden brows knitting together slightly. Tyrion has been speaking to you, hasn't he? He is my husband. A husband is one thing, but an ally? Cersei's voice lowered slightly. That is another matter entirely. Do not be fooled, girl. My brother is no true friend to you. Sansa tilted her head, feigning innocence. Has he done something to make you doubt him? Cersei's lips pressed into a thin line. Tyrion plays the game well, but he plays for himself." Sansa let her silence stretch, as if considering the words carefully. In truth, she had already learned that much on her own. Tyrion was clever, but he was also a survivor. He had no illusions of honor or duty, no misplaced trust in the goodness of men. And yet, he had never lied to her, not once. "Thank you for your guidance, Your Grace," Sansa said finally. "I will remember your warning." Cersei studied her for a long moment, and then, to Sansa's surprise, she laughed. It was a low, almost amused sound. "You are learning," Cersei said, echoing Tyrion's words from days ago. "Perhaps you are not as foolish as I once thought." Sansa lowered her eyes, hiding the flicker of satisfaction that passed through her. No, she was not foolish at all. She was learning, and soon she would be ready to act. Sansa stood by the balcony of their chambers, staring down at the city below. King's Landing was alive even at night, its streets lit by lanterns and torches, the distant hum of voices and laughter reaching her ears. It looked peaceful from here, but she knew the truth. Beneath the illusion of grandeur, the city was rotting. She heard Tyrion's footsteps behind her before he spoke. "You've been quiet today," he said, pouring himself a goblet of wine. "That usually means one of two things. Either you're deep in thought, or you've finally decided to poison me." Sansa turned to face him, a ghost of a smile on her lips. "And if I were, would you drink anyway?" Tyrion chuckled. "Likely. I have a terrible habit of making poor decisions where wine is involved." She hesitated, watching him. It had become easier to be in his presence, easier to talk to him without the bitterness that had once gripped her. She had spent so much time hating the Lannisters that she had never allowed herself to see the man standing before her. "You once said that survival in King's Landing requires strategy," she said slowly. "I think I finally understand what you meant." Tyrion raised an eyebrow. "Go on, I cannot leave yet. But that does not mean I must be powerless." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "If I am to survive here, I need more than knowledge. I need influence." Tyrion set his goblet down, watching her with interest. "And you think I can give you of that?" "I think we can give each other that," she corrected. "You are underestimated, just as I am. No one believes I'm capable of anything but pretty smiles and curtsies. But that is an advantage, isn't it?" Tyrion's smile was slow, but real. "It seems I've created a monster." "Not a monster," Sansa said. "A player, a flicker of something." Passed through Tyrion's expression, something almost like pride. "Very well, my lady, let us play the game together then." Sansa exhaled, knowing that she had just made a choice that would shape the rest of her life. She had accepted Tyrion as her husband, not just in name, but in purpose, and together they would take back what had been stolen from them. The first test came sooner than expected. It happened at a feast where the great lords and ladies of King's Landing gathered under the grand chandeliers of the Red Keep, wine flowing freely as Joffrey paraded himself in front of his court. Sansa sat beside Tyrion, her posture perfect, her expression serene. She had learned well by now, never let them see your fear. Joffrey had been watching her all evening, amusement flickering in his cruel eyes. She knew he would not let the night end without humiliating her in some way. The only question was how. The answer came when he stood, goblet in hand, and raised his voice so all could hear. "My dear uncle," Joffrey called, his smirk widening, "tell me, how does it feel to bed the daughter of a traitor?" Silence fell over the hall. All eyes turned to Tyrion. Sansa could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken challenge. If Tyrion ignored it, he would appear weak. If he reacted too strongly, he would be punished. It was a game, and she was beginning to understand how to play it. Before Tyrion could speak, Sansa placed her hand lightly on his, drawing his attention. Then she stood. The hall seemed to hold its breath as she addressed the king. "I am honored to be Lady Lannister," she said calmly. My husband is the wisest man in this court, and I learn from him every day." Joffrey's smirk faltered. This was not the reaction he had expected. Sansa smiled sweetly. "It is a shame, Your Grace, that wisdom cannot be inherited." A ripple of laughter swept through the hall. It was quiet, cautious, but it was there. Joffrey's face twisted in rage. "You dare, my king!" Tyrion cut in smoothly, rising beside her. "My wife only means to say that wisdom must be earned, not given. A lesson we all must learn in time." Joffrey seethed, but he could not punish them, not without appearing a fool. His pride would not allow it. Sansa lowered her gaze, hiding the flicker of satisfaction in her eyes. For the first time in King's Landing, she had won, and she was only just beginning. After the feast, the air in their chambers was thick with unspoken words. Sansa sat near the fire, feeling the warmth on her skin, but her mind was still in the great hall. She had humiliated Joffrey. Not enough to make him act immediately, but enough to plant a seed of doubt in his mind. Tyrion poured himself a drink, watching her carefully. "That was a bold move," he finally said. Sansa met his gaze. "You taught me that a well-placed word can be sharper than a sword." A small smile played at his lips. "That, my dear wife, is true, but it is also dangerous." She knew that. Joffrey was unpredictable, and she had wounded his pride in front of his court. He would not forget it. "Then we must be ready," she said. "If I have learned anything, it is that King's Landing is a city of snakes. I will not be defenseless again." Tyrion exhaled, studying her. "And what would you have us do?" Sansa straightened. "We need allies. You already have Bronn, and perhaps even Varys in his own way. But we need more." Tyrion's eyes darkened slightly. "You are thinking of the Tyrells." Sansa nodded. "Lady Margaery is clever. She knows that Joffrey is dangerous, and she will want to protect herself. If I can gain her trust, then you may have a powerful friend." Tyrion finished. He swirled the wine in his cup. "You truly are learning." She was, and she was done being a pawn. Sansa Stark was playing the game now, and she intended to win. The storm came sooner than expected. Joffrey's wrath had been simmering since the feast, and Sansa knew it was only a matter of time before he struck back. He would not forget her defiance, so she moved first. Margaery Tyrell welcomed her warmly into her circle, as Sansa had hoped. The young queen-to-be was charming, intelligent, and most importantly, ambitious. She saw in Sansa a potential ally, someone who understood the dangers of Joffrey's rule as well as she did. "We are stronger together, my lady," Margaery had told her one afternoon in the gardens. "A lion may be king of the jungle, but even a lion fears a pack of wolves." A pack of wolves. Sansa held on to those words as she and Tyrion prepared for what was coming. They had little true power compared to the Lannisters, but they had something just as valuable: information. And then Joffrey died, poisoned at his own wedding, his face purple, his body convulsing as his mother screamed. Sansa had planned for many outcomes, but this had not been one of them. As the chaos erupted, she felt Tyrion's hand grip hers tightly, a silent message: stay calm, stay quiet. But it did not matter. Cersei's eyes had already found them, and just like that, the game changed. Tyrion was accused of murder. Sansa was declared guilty by association, but unlike in another life, one where she had fled the city blindly, this time she was prepared. She did not run into Littlefinger's waiting arms. She did not leave herself vulnerable. Instead, she played her final move. Varys, ever the opportunist, arranged for Tyrion's escape, but Sansa did not go with him. She knew her place was still in the capital for now. Margaery and the Tyrells would need her, and together they could shift the balance of power. Tyrion hesitated before he left, standing in the shadows of the tunnels beneath the city. "You have changed," he murmured. "You showed me how," she said. Softly, He gave a small, tired smile. "Then I suppose I have done something right." And then he was gone. Sansa Stark remained, no longer a frightened girl, no longer a pawn. She was a player in the game now, and she would play to win.